The horse cried in the storm, and what she did next changed one man's life forever. On a night when thunder rolled through the Kentucky hills, a poor farmer named Ethan Cole found a dying mare at his fence. Her eyes wet, her breath broken, her foal trembling beside her. She pressed the baby toward him before collapsing in the mud. From that moment, his life, once empty, lost and forgotten, began to change in ways no storm could ever wash away. The rain had been falling for hours, steady and cold, drumming against the tin roof of Ethan Cole's barn like a heartbeat he couldn't shut out. The fields beyond were nothing but mud and broken corn stalks, the last remains of a harvest that had failed him for the third year in a row. He stood under the dim porch light, mending a cracked feed bucket, when a sound rose through the rain, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. It wasn't thunder, nor the groan of wind through the valley. It was a cry, deep, trembling, almost human. Ethan froze. The horses at the neighbor's farm had been sold months ago. He knew every animal's call in this valley, and nothing had ever sounded like that before. He stepped off the porch, his boots sinking into the mud. The smell of wet soil, wood smoke, and despair hung in the air. The cry came again, closer this time, carrying through the mist like a plea. He followed it past the sagging fence line, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Then he saw her. A mare stood just beyond the broken rails, soaked through, trembling, her golden brown coat streaked with soot. Steam rose off her body in the cold, and her front leg hung awkwardly, twisted or burned. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They weren't wild or panicked. They were pleading. At her side, barely standing, was a foal. Its thin legs trembled beneath it, its coat slick and dark with rain. The mare nudged it forward, once, twice, pushing it toward Ethan's side of the fence. Then she let out a sound so low and broken it cut through him. It wasn't just pain, it was farewell. "Easy," Ethan whispered, his voice rough from disuse. He crouched near the fence, palm out. "Easy now, girl." The mare's breath came out in ragged clouds. She stepped closer, her head lowering until her forehead nearly touched his chest through the rails. He could smell the smoke in her mane, the metallic tang of blood, the earth itself clinging to her. Her eyes held his, steady, searching, and something in him cracked open. Behind her, the foal stumbled. The mare turned, nudged it again, then looked back at Ethan. He didn't need words to understand. She was giving it to him. The rain thickened, drumming harder against the world. Ethan swung a leg over the fence, his old knee screaming in protest. The mud sucked at his boots as he crossed to her. The foal tried to shy away, but the mare pressed her nose against it, urging it closer. Ethan slid his arms beneath the small, trembling body. It was heavier than he expected. Warm, fragile, alive. He lifted it and turned back toward the fence, the foal's heartbeat pulsing against his chest. When he looked over his shoulder, the mare had sunk to her knees. "Hold on," he said, though he knew she couldn't. "Just hold on a little longer." He laid the foal on the dry side of the fence, under the eaves of the barn, then climbed back to her. The rain ran down his face, cold and merciless. She was breathing shallow now, her eyes glassy. He knelt beside her and placed a hand against her neck. The muscles were trembling beneath her skin. "You did good," he said softly. "You're a good mother." The mare's eyes met his one last time, and something passed between them. Trust, sorrow, and a strange kind of peace. Then her body went still. The rain fell harder, washing over her face, carrying away the soot, leaving only a faint glimmer of her chestnut coat beneath the mud. Ethan stayed there for a long while, his hand resting on her neck until the warmth faded. The valley was quiet, except for the steady whisper of rain. Behind him, the foal made a small, desperate sound, half cry, half question. He rose slowly, his back aching, and turned toward it. The tiny creature was trying to stand. Legs splayed, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Its coat gleamed wet under the lantern light. It looked at him as though it had already decided something, that he was all it had left. Ethan swallowed hard. "Well," he murmured, voice shaking, "looks like it's just you and me now." He lifted the foal again, carrying it toward the barn. The world was silent except for the sound of rain and the faint rhythm of a newborn heart against his chest. Inside the barn, the lantern flickered weakly, painting the wood in soft amber. He set the foal down in a pile of old straw, grabbed a wool blanket, and began to rub its coat dry. The foal blinked up at him, its breath shaky but steadying. Outside, lightning cracked across the valley, illuminating the fence line where the mare lay, a still shape in the storm. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the rain fall over her, and felt something stir deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. He whispered a quiet promise to the night. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I swear." And somewhere beyond the thunder, it felt like the earth heard him. The barn smelled of damp straw and smoke. Ethan moved through it like a man walking inside a memory. Slow, uncertain, listening for something he couldn't quite name. The lantern hanging from the rafter hissed softly, throwing weak light across the beams. The foal, still slick with rain, trembled on its unsteady legs, head drooping in exhaustion. Its coat, now half dry, shimmered the color of wet maple bark. Ethan knelt beside it and pulled an old wool blanket tighter around its narrow body. "Easy now," he said, though the foal didn't understand. Its ears twitched toward the sound of his voice, and it made a tiny noise, a breath more than a whinny. He'd heard hundreds of horses in his life, but never a sound that small, that lost. Outside, thunder rolled down the valley. The rain hadn't stopped. It came in long, dragging sheets that blurred the world beyond the doorway. Somewhere in that darkness lay the mare. Ethan kept catching himself glancing that way, as if expecting her to rise again, shake the rain off, and come calling for her baby. But she didn't. The only heartbeat left in that barn belonged to the foal. He rummaged through an old wooden chest until he found a dented metal pot and filled it with water from the pump. He set it over the small propane stove in the corner. The hiss of flame filled the silence. When the water steamed, he poured some into a cracked mug and dipped his fingers in. It was barely warm. He didn't have milk replacer, not even a bottle. All he could do was wet his fingers and let the foal suckle. The tiny tongue brushed against his skin, desperate and trusting. Ethan looked down at his hands, rough and calloused, blackened under the nails from years of failed harvests and machine oil. He couldn't remember the last time anything so fragile had depended on him. He hadn't been anyone's choice in a long time, not his ex-wife's, not the bank's, not even his own luck. Yet here was this creature, trembling against him, choosing him without hesitation. April's voice startled him from behind. "Uncle Ethan?" She stood in the doorway, her sweatshirt too big for her thin shoulders, her hair plastered from the rain. She clutched a flashlight and blinked at the scene. "What's that?" "A foal," he said. "Its mama didn't make it." Her eyes widened, filling with something between wonder and fear. "Can we keep it?" He hesitated. Words like feed, vet bills, and bank debt circled his mind like vultures. But he saw the way the lantern light caught April's face, the same spark her mother once had before the world taught her to be careful with hope. "We'll try," he said. April stepped closer, kneeling beside the foal. "He's so small." She touched its muzzle lightly. The foal jerked, then leaned into her hand. "He likes me." "Maybe," Ethan murmured. He wasn't sure whether to smile or cry. They worked in silence for a while. April fetched towels. Ethan rubbed the foal's legs dry. The night dragged on. Every hour he checked to make sure the little chest still rose and fell. Each breath felt like a victory. Somewhere near dawn, the rain finally softened to a whisper. When the first pale light crept through the slats, Ethan stood and stretched his aching back. The barn looked different in morning gray, still poor, still broken, but somehow alive. April had fallen asleep, curled up beside the foal, her small hand resting on its side. The foal slept too, its head resting near her shoulder. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't prayed in years, but the sight pulled something old from him. He whispered, "If you sent it here, I'll do what I can." He walked to the barn door, pushed it open, and stared out at the fog lying low over the valley. Beyond the fence, the shape of the mare was just visible, a dark curve against the grass. He stood there for a long time, hat in hand. When he returned inside, the foal stirred, blinking at him. He knelt, resting his palm on its forehead. "You made it through the night, little one. That's more than I expected from either of us." April woke at the sound of his voice. "What are we going to call him?" she asked, yawning. Ethan thought for a moment, glancing toward the open door where the fog shifted like a river of white. "River," he said, "because that's what he came from." April smiled sleepily. "River," she repeated, and the name seemed to fit. The foal lifted its head as if responding. Its eyes were dark, clear, and far too knowing for its age. It nudged Ethan's hand once, firmly, as if to seal an agreement neither of them truly understood. He looked into those eyes and felt a strange heat behind his ribs, a pulse that had nothing to do with exhaustion. It was the faint ache of belonging, something he'd forgotten how to feel. The lantern sputtered out, leaving only the pale morning light. Ethan stood there, between the sleeping girl and the newborn foal, and realized the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, of breath, of promise, of life beginning again. Morning in the valley broke soft and silver, the kind of light that made the hills look like they were breathing. Mist hung low over the cornfields, clinging to every fence post, every stubborn stalk still standing after the storms. Ethan Cole sat on the porch steps with a mug of black coffee gone cold, his eyes on the barn. The old boards creaked in the wind, and from inside came the faintest rustle. The sound of life. He hadn't heard that in years. Not since the house grew quiet after Mary left. Not since the bank took the cattle and the tractors. But that morning, there was a heartbeat in the barn, and it changed everything. When April appeared, barefoot and rubbing sleep from her eyes, Ethan managed a smile. "He's awake," he said. She grinned and dashed across the yard, her laughter echoing like something sacred. Ethan followed slowly, the limp in his left leg reminding him of a horse that had thrown him 20 years back, a pain he'd learned to live with. Inside, April knelt beside River, stroking his neck, while the foal nosed curiously at her sleeve. "He's stronger today," she said. Ethan watched the way the little horse leaned into her touch. "Yeah," he murmured, "he is." He fetched a tin pan and filled it with warm milk from the kitchen. April held it steady while River learned to drink, awkward and eager. For the first time, Ethan caught himself chuckling under his breath. The sound startled him. It had been so long since it came naturally. When the feeding was done, he stepped outside, wiping his hands on his jeans. The air smelled of wet grass and chimney smoke. From across the field came the faint clang of a church bell. Sundays used to mean something here. Potlucks, hymns, neighbors dropping by. Now it was just another day to keep the place from falling apart. Beneath the quiet, though, he felt something shifting. Later, he drove his rusted pickup to town, April riding shotgun, her knees pulled up under her chin. They stopped at Carter's Feed and Supply, where Dr. Carter was weighing bags of alfalfa. The old vet looked up, his face lined like cracked leather. "He made it through the night?" Ethan nodded. "Barely. We named him River." "That's a good name," Carter said. "You'll need milk replacer, and patience, a lot of both." He gave a dry smile, slipping a small discount without saying it aloud. Not many folks would have stayed up all night for an orphaned foal. Ethan shrugged. Didn't have much else going on. But when he looked over at April standing by the window, watching sparrows pick at the gravel, he knew it wasn't true. Something was going on. Something slow, quiet, but alive. They drove home through winding mountain roads, the radio crackling with static. April hummed along to a country song about second chances. Ethan didn't believe in those, not really, but the melody stayed with him. Back at the farm, he fixed the hole in the barn roof with scraps of tin, the kind of job that left splinters in his hands and time for thinking. He thought about the promise he'd made the night before, to take care of River, and wondered if he was a fool for saying it out loud. That evening, while the sun dipped behind the ridges, he found April sitting in the grass beside River. The foal's head rested in her lap, eyes half closed, trusting. The image stopped him in the doorway, a man who'd lost nearly everything, a child with her whole life ahead, and between them, the small creature that somehow bridged the distance. "You tired?" he asked. April shook her head. "He likes when I hum." "What are you singing?" "Something Grandma used to." She looked up. "Do you think God sent him?" Ethan hesitated. He'd stopped trying to answer questions like that a long time ago. "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe the world just thought we needed him." She smiled, satisfied. "That's the same thing." He sat beside her, the grass cool beneath his palms. For a long time, neither spoke. The barn swallows darted through the air, catching the last light. River stirred and lifted his head, bumping Ethan's arm gently. The touch startled him. It was the same gentle insistence the mare had shown before she died. A bridge, again, between loss and something new. When April finally went inside to help May prepare supper, Ethan stayed behind. He walked to the fence, where the mare had fallen. The rain had washed her away, and the earth there was soft, freshly seeded with clover. He knelt and pressed his palm to the soil. "I'm doing my best," he whispered. "You can rest now." A breeze moved through the valley, soft and certain. From the barn came River's faint call, the kind that carried a note of both hunger and faith. Ethan turned toward it and felt, for the first time in years, that he still had a place in this world. That night, he stood by the window as a pale moon rose over the hills. The foal shifted in its stall. The child slept with the calm of those who believe tomorrow will be better. And Ethan, who had lived so long counting what he'd lost, found himself counting breaths instead. When he finally closed his eyes, it wasn't the sound of rain or debt that filled his head, but the steady rhythm of life returning, one heartbeat at a time. The wind shifted that afternoon, carrying with it the faint scent of gasoline and money. Ethan heard the crunch of tires on gravel long before the truck came into view. It wasn't the kind of sound that belonged on his land. The rumble was too smooth, too clean. When the sleek silver pickup finally stopped in front of the gate, dust rose like smoke around it. A woman stepped out, tall and composed, her boots new, her jacket the kind that cost more than Ethan's monthly groceries. Her dark hair was tied back, and when she removed her sunglasses, her eyes were sharp, scanning everything: the sagging barn, the patched fences, the rusted mailbox with coal painted in fading blue. She looked like someone who hadn't lost anything in a long time. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, her tone polite but clipped. He nodded from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Who's asking?" "Brooke Davenport," she said. "Davenport Stables, Lexington. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ethan frowned. "Don't know what you mean." She took a few steps closer, the heels of her boots sinking slightly into the mud. "A mare of ours, Hirith's Laurel, went missing during the storm. She was pregnant, very near foaling. My ranch manager followed reports of a burned horse found in this area." Her gaze drifted toward the barn. "I assume she came here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She came, yes. She's gone now." Brooke's expression softened only slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that." She hesitated, as if the words cost her. "But that means the foal she delivered—" "River," April's voice cut in from behind him. She stood at the doorway, clutching the edge of her sweater. "His name's River." Brooke turned, her brows lifting at the sound of the name. "River," she repeated slowly, as if testing how it felt in her mouth. "Well, miss, River happens to be registered to Davenport Stables. That makes him our property." Ethan stepped between them. "Ma'am, that foal's not property. He's alive because his mama brought him here, because she trusted me to look after him." Brooke's lips curved into something halfway between amusement and pity. "Trust? Horses don't make choices, Mr. Cole. They react." "Maybe you've never met one that did," he said quietly. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind brushing through the corn stubble. Brooke studied him the way someone might study a wild animal, respectful but certain of her own control. Then she reached into her leather bag and pulled out a folder. "I have papers, bloodline documentation, insurance contracts, evaluation report. That foal represents $20,000 in breeding stock." Ethan looked at the papers but didn't take them. "Then you've got more to lose than I do. I'm not giving him up." Brooke sighed, the kind of sigh people use when they've already decided how the story ends. "I understand you're attached, but I suggest you think carefully. The law's on my side. I'll give you a few days to reconsider." She turned back toward her truck, her reflection flashing in the clean chrome. April whispered, "Uncle Ethan, what's she gonna do?" He watched Brooke climb into the cab. "Whatever folks like her always do," he said. "Try to buy what they don't understand." As the truck pulled away, dust rising behind it like a ghost, Ethan felt River's soft nicker from inside the barn. He walked over, resting his hands on the stall door. The foal stood near the slats, nose pressed against the wood, as if sensing the change in air. "It's all right," Ethan murmured. "No one's taking you." River blinked at him, then leaned forward until his forehead touched the man's sleeve. That simple touch steadied Ethan in a way no word ever could. That evening, the hills turned gold in the dying light. Ethan fixed the fence where Hearth had fallen. The soil was rich there now, soft with clover, and he thought about how life refused to end where it should. April joined him, sitting cross-legged in the dirt. "She's gonna come back, isn't she?" "Probably," he admitted. "Then what'll we do?" He looked at the horizon, where the sun slipped behind the ridge. "We do what your grandma always said. Hold on to what's right, even if it's small." They stayed until the stars came out. The barn lights glowed behind them, a single warm square in the distance. Inside, River shifted and made that low sound again, the one that wasn't quite fear, wasn't quite peace. When Ethan finally went inside, he found his mother's Bible lying open on the table, pages curled from years of damp. A verse caught his eye. "The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." He closed the book gently. He wasn't a shepherd, not by any stretch. But maybe he could learn to keep watch over one small soul. Later, lying awake in bed, he heard the faint rumble of thunder miles away. Or maybe it was just the echo of Brooke Davenport's engine fading into the night. Either way, he knew this wasn't over. Outside, the wind carried a smell he hadn't noticed before, the scent of new hay mixed with rain. It was the smell of beginnings disguised as endings. He whispered into the dark, "We'll fight if we have to, River." And from the barn came the quiet, rhythmic sound of a foal breathing, steady and sure, like the ticking of a clock that had finally started again. By mid-morning, the valley was wrapped in quiet fog, the kind that muffled every sound except the heartbeat of your own thoughts. Ethan worked in the barn, mending a cracked board with a handful of nails that didn't quite fit. River watched him from the stall, chewing on the corner of a feed bucket, as if unaware that the world outside was beginning to close in on them. Dr. Carter arrived in his old blue Ford, gravel crunching under the tires. He stepped out with the slow stiffness of a man who'd spent half a century bent over sick animals. His gray coat smelled faintly of iodine and tobacco. "He's growing," he said as he entered the barn, eyes softening when River stretched his neck toward him. "Got that spark I like to see. Eats well?" "Too well," Ethan said. "He'd eat my hat if I let him." The vet chuckled, running his hand down River's back. Then he frowned, brushing his thumb along the foal's mane. A fine gray dust clung to his skin. "You burn wood in here?" Ethan shook his head. "No. Why?" "This ain't dust," Dr. Carter murmured. He rubbed his fingers together, frowning. "It's soot. Look here, stuck in the coat, especially near the roots. Ethan leaned closer, tracing the dark flecks. The smell hit him. Faint, acrid, unmistakable. Smoke. You think it's from her? The mare? Carter nodded slowly. Likely. I read about a barn fire down near Lexington last week. Davenport Stables. Could be she came from there? Ethan felt his chest tighten. Brooks' place. The vet's eyes flicked toward him. You've met her? Yesterday. She came here looking for River. Then that's more than coincidence. Carter sighed, straightening up. If that mare escaped a fire, she came a long way on a bad leg. A miracle she made it this far. He glanced at River again. And that miracle's standing right in front of you. They were silent for a moment. The fog outside thinned, sunlight breaking through in thin, uncertain stripes. Dust danced in the light like ghost ash. Ethan's throat burned. She must have been terrified, he said quietly. And still, she brought him here. That's instinct, Carter said gently. And maybe something more. As the vet gathered his things, another voice called from the doorway. You hiring? Ethan turned. A boy, no, a young man, stood at the threshold, soaked from the knees down. He couldn't have been more than 19, hair matted, clothes torn. He held a canvas backpack that looked like it had been through the same storm Hireth had. Name's Trey, he said. Been walking a while. Heard you might need a hand. Ethan studied him. Something in the kid's voice, a kind of guilt, made him pause. You ever worked horses before? Some, Trey said quickly. I can muck stalls, fix fence, whatever you need. Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow. Heard where, son? Trey hesitated, then glanced toward the vet's truck. Down from Lexington, Davenport Stables. The barn fell silent, except for River's soft snort. Ethan felt the air change, thick and uneasy. That right? Yes, sir, Trey said, shifting on his feet. I left after the fire. Didn't seem right, what happened. Carter's eyes narrowed. You know what caused it? Trey swallowed hard. They said faulty wiring, but it wasn't. Someone left the heaters on in the breeding wing. They'd locked the stalls that night, said the wind might spook the mares. His voice cracked. I tried to go back, but the doors, they wouldn't open. Ethan's stomach turned. He saw the mare again in the rain, her burned flank, the look in her eyes. And Hireth? She wasn't supposed to be in that section. She broke out, I guess. When the fire hit, she kicked the latch off another door, got out. None of the others did. Trey looked down. I saw her running, limping, heading north. I thought she wouldn't make it. Guess I was wrong. Carter crossed his arms. And you left? Trey nodded. Couldn't stay there. Couldn't sleep knowing... He stopped, his eyes wet. Mr. Davenport told us not to talk. Said insurance would handle it. Ethan walked to the stall. River pressed against him, seeking his warmth. The weight of what he'd heard settled deep in his chest. Anger, grief, and something like awe. The mare hadn't been fleeing for her life. She'd been running toward something. He turned to Trey. You can stay here. Work, eat, earn your keep. But you tell me everything you know. Every word. Yes, sir. Carter nodded once. I'll check in later. And Ethan, keep that foal close. If Davenport's people come sniffing again, don't let them take him. After the vet left, Trey helped Ethan spread clean straw in the stall. They worked in silence. Every now and then, River nudged Trey's shoulder, curious but unafraid. The boy smiled weakly. He's just like her, he whispered. Brave. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, the Bible still open on the table beside him. The lamp cast a warm pool of light across the pages. The smell of smoke still lingered on his hands. Outside, the barn stood quiet under the stars. River shifted, restless, as if sensing the ghosts that clung to the rafters. Ethan whispered a promise to the night. "I'll make this right." He didn't know yet what right meant, only that it had something to do with justice and something to do with gratitude. The wind rose through the hollow, carrying with it a faint smell of ash and wildflowers, remnants of the mare's long, impossible journey. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the first thin smoke of dawn was already curling into the sky. Whatever came next, he would face it. For her, for River, and for the quiet, burning truth that even from the ashes, something good could still be born. The first frost came early that year, sweeping down the valley like a slow white tide. Each morning the fields shone silver, and every breath hung in the air like a small ghost. Ethan woke before dawn to light the stove, the familiar ache in his joints flaring with the cold. The barn loomed quiet in the pale light, its roof patched, its wood dark with age. Yet inside, it felt warmer than the house ever did. River was growing fast, his legs still awkward but strong. The foal had learned to nuzzle Ethan's coat pockets for treats, his breath sweet with the smell of milk replacer. Trey fed him while April brushed the tangles from his mane, talking softly to keep him calm. The boy worked hard, never asking for more than a meal and a cot in the loft. Sometimes Ethan caught him staring into the distance, as if still seeing the fire that chased him all the way here. May's mind had good days and bad ones. Some mornings she'd wake humming hymns from church, others she'd forget where she was entirely. But she always remembered the foal. "That little one," she'd say, tapping her temple, "he carries light. Animals know what people forget." Ethan never corrected her. In the quiet of those brittle mornings, he began to think she might be right. The town started to notice. Mornings, while buying flour at Henrik's store, Ethan would catch snippets of talk. "The hermit's got himself a horse. He's got help now, that runaway kid." But no one mocked him. Maybe pity had softened their tongues, or maybe something about the story, the burned mare, the orphaned foal, reminded them of their own scars. As winter deepened, neighbors began to appear uninvited. Marlene Copper from the diner brought stew one afternoon, her car sliding on the icy drive. "Figured you could use something hot," she said, pretending not to notice the cracks in Ethan's boots. The local church sent hay bales that didn't quite fit the barn door, so they stacked them outside and wrapped them in plastic sheeting. The 4-H kids left small baskets of apples at the gate. Each kindness felt like a patch on a coat that might finally hold together. Still, it wasn't easy. The old tractor refused to start, and Ethan spent long nights by the stove figuring how to stretch feed money. More than once, he caught himself looking at the envelope Brooke Davenport had left weeks ago. $15,000 promised if he'd hand River over quietly. It sat unopened in a drawer beside his father's pocket knife. Every time he thought about it, he'd look out the window and see April asleep in the straw beside River, her small hand resting on the foal's side, and he'd remember why he hadn't touched it. One evening, a snowstorm rolled through the hollow. The world turned white and soundless. Ethan and Trey secured the barn doors, stacking bales against the wind. River paced nervously, ears flicking, hooves thudding on the floor. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, resting a hand on his neck. The animal's warmth seeped into his cold fingers, grounding him in a way no prayer could. That night they all slept in the barn. The storm howled, but inside it was calm. May dozed in a chair wrapped in quilts, April curled next to River, and Trey kept watch by the stove. Ethan sat awake for hours, listening to the foals breathing and the wind tapping the shutters. Somewhere in that fragile quiet, he realized what had changed. They weren't surviving in spite of the world anymore. They were surviving with it. When morning came, the snow had stopped, leaving the land buried under a soft, unbroken sheet. The light pouring through the cracks glowed gold against the drifts. River bounded out into the paddock, bucking clumsily, spraying snow with each leap. April laughed until her breath came in clouds. For a moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't dared to feel in years: pride. He fixed the fence, one nail at a time, while the others worked nearby. Trey shoveled paths, humming under his breath, and May wandered out, her slippers sinking into the snow. "This place feels alive again," she said, her eyes clear for once. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe it is." By dusk, the sky was bruised purple, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney. They ate Marlene's stew reheated on the stove, the smell of thyme filling the kitchen. April read aloud from an old library book about wild horses in Nevada. River's hooves clopped softly outside as he circled the yard, his breath silver in the cold. When the girl finished reading, Ethan looked around the table. The old woman, the child, the boy who'd run from his past, and felt the strange, quiet fullness of a family that wasn't bound by blood, but by choice. The kind of family that only happens when people decide to stay. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The snow gleamed under a near-full moon, and the valley was so still it felt sacred. From the barn came a low nicker. He followed it, boots crunching in the frozen crust, and found River standing at the door, head high, eyes reflecting starlight. "You did good, little one," he said softly, scratching the spot between the foal's ears. "We made it through the first storm." River exhaled, a cloud of white mist, and nudged Ethan's shoulder, pushing him back toward the warmth inside. It was such a small gesture, wordless, instinctive, but it carried the same unspoken message the mare had given that night in the rain. "Keep going." Ethan stood there a moment, longer, watching the breath of horse and man mingle in the cold air, until it became impossible to tell which belonged to which. By the time the snow began to melt, the valley had softened into that quiet gray between winter and spring. The frozen ground bled into mud, and the air carried the faint scent of thawing earth and manure. For Ethan Cole, the change of season brought both relief and dread. He could fix fences again, tend the fields. But it also meant that Brooke Davenport's silence couldn't last forever. Dr. Carter arrived one afternoon in his old truck, its tires hissing through the puddles. He had a manila envelope tucked under his arm, and a look on his face Ethan didn't quite trust. "I thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing it over. Inside were photocopied registration papers, embossed seals, and a glossy photograph of a mare in her prime. Chestnut coat gleaming under arena lights. The name printed beneath it read, "Hiraeth's Laurel." Ethan stared at the image, his thumb brushing the name. "That's her?" Carter nodded. "She was famous once, retired from competition after an injury, used in a therapy program for veterans. Folks said she had a way of calming even the worst cases of shell shock. Therapy horse? Ethan looked up. Yeah, Carter said. There's a write-up here from a paper in Lexington. Talks about how soldiers used to visit her every week. One guy said she looked straight into him and made the noise in his head go quiet. That's not something you fake. Ethan's throat tightened. He remembered the mare's eyes in the rain, how deliberate her gaze had been. She knew what she was doing, he whispered. She didn't just run. Carter gave a half smile. Maybe not. Horses remember kindness. They remember safety. You must have reminded her of both. April appeared then, holding a brush dripping with water. River trotted behind her, his coat finally shedding the dull fuzz of winter. He's starting to look like her, she said proudly. Same color, same star on his head. Ethan handed her the photo. April traced the line of the mare's mane with her finger. She's beautiful. She was more than that, Carter said softly. She saved lives. April looked at him, wide-eyed. Then she saved us too. That evening, after Carter left, the house filled with the sound of dripping eaves and the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. Trey sat at the table, mending a torn halter strap. His hands were steady now, more sure than they'd been months ago. I looked her up online, he said, not glancing up. Hearth's Laurel, won the Tri-State Cutting Finals. There's even a video, her last run before she got hurt. You should see her move. Ethan shook his head. I've seen enough to know she gave everything she had. Trey hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. There's something else you should know. He unfolded a small, smoke-stained pamphlet. The header read, Davenport Equine Rehabilitation Program, with Brooks' name listed as director. They used to bring in vets, kids with trauma. I was there for a summer. Hearth wasn't just another horse. She was the reason people came. He swallowed hard. When the fire started, she could have run for the open pasture. But she didn't. She went back in, I saw it. She tried to kick the latches on the other stalls. I think she freed one or two before she went down. The words landed heavy, like stones in the quiet room. April covered her mouth. May, sitting by the stove, whispered a prayer. Ethan closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw that mare again, limping through fire and rain, dragging herself across miles just to reach his fence. He understood now. She wasn't running from the blaze. She was finishing what she'd started, saving what could still be saved. Later, when the house slept, he went to the barn. River was lying in the straw, eyes half-lidded. Ethan sat beside him and laid the photo of Hearth on the ground. You come from something good, he said quietly. Something braver than I've ever been. The foal stirred, pressing his muzzle against the picture as if recognizing it. His breath fogged over the glossy paper, blurring her image. But Ethan could still see enough. The same white star, the same gentle curve of the eyes. You know, Ethan murmured, your mama might have had a purpose bigger than herself. Maybe that purpose didn't end with her. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of wet clover and wood smoke. He thought of Carter's words, how animals remember kindness, and wondered if people could, too. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. Maybe it just needed reminders of what was worth holding on to. By morning, River was up early, restless and bright. April led him around the paddock, laughing as he tossed his head and chased his shadow. May clapped from the porch, and even Trey, still burdened with guilt, smiled for once. Ethan leaned on the fence, watching them. The sun broke through a thin veil of clouds, setting the frost to glittering. For a moment, the light caught the scar along River's flank, barely visible now, and it gleamed like a brand, a mark of survival. Brooke Davenport might still believe that piece of paper in her file cabinet proved ownership, but Ethan knew better. What bound River here wasn't law or bloodline. It was a promise, one that began in fire and found its way to a man who'd thought his heart was too tired to keep another. He turned to go inside, and something caught his eye. A black SUV parked on the ridge, half hidden by trees. A figure stood beside it, watching the barn through binoculars. Brooke, or one of her people. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let them look," he muttered. "They'll see a family, not a paycheck." When he stepped back into the barn, River whinnied softly, the sound carrying through the valley like an echo of Hiraeth herself. Ethan rested his hand on the foal's neck, feeling the pulse beneath the warm skin, steady and sure. He whispered, "She didn't die for nothing, boy. We're going to prove that." And for the first time, saying it didn't feel like hope. It felt like truth. The letter came folded in a crisp white envelope, the kind of paper that carried the smell of offices and lawyers. It arrived with the morning mail, slid beneath Ethan's door by the postman who avoided eye contact. Inside was a typed letter and a check. Brooke Davenport's signature glimmered in neat blue ink at the bottom. $15,000. For a long moment, Ethan just stared at the number. The ink shimmered under the sunlight spilling through the kitchen window. That much money could clear what was left of the bank debt, buy feed for River, repair the roof before another season of storms. It could keep April and May safe, the farm steady for at least a year. It was the kind of offer a man like him didn't get twice in his lifetime. He poured himself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and read the letter again. "Mr. Cole, I understand your attachment to the foal, but this matter needs to be resolved promptly. Consider this payment as fair compensation for the animal and for your time and care." There was no cruelty in the tone, just distance. The kind of politeness that came from people who'd never had to choose between compassion and survival. April came in, rubbing her eyes. "What's that?" "Just a letter," he said. He folded it once, slid it back into the envelope, but the motion was too deliberate, too heavy. She caught his hesitation instantly. "Is it about River?" He nodded. "Brooke wants him back. Says she's willing to pay." April frowned. "But he's not for sale." "No," Ethan said softly. "He isn't." She crossed her arms, defiant in a way that reminded him of her mother. "You're not even thinking about it, are you?" He wanted to say no, to give her that kind of certainty. But the numbers on that check whispered other truths, about cracked shingles, overdue taxes, the winter feed already half gone. "I'm just thinking," he murmured. April's face hardened. "River's family. You can't sell family." She left before he could answer, the screen door slamming behind her. The rest of the morning moved like cold honey. Trey was out fixing the fence line. May sat humming by the window, half aware of the tension that hung in the air. Ethan went through the motions, splitting firewood, hauling water, but the thought of that check pulsed behind everything he did. After lunch, Dr. Carter's truck pulled into the yard. "Heard from Davenport again?" he asked, stepping out with his ever-present thermos. Ethan nodded. "She's offering $15,000. Carter whistled low. "That's a lot of feed money." "It is." The vet studied him for a long moment. "You thinking about taking it?" Ethan rubbed his jaw. "I don't know, Doc. It's not about greed. I just—" He looked toward the barn where River's head poked through the slats, watching them with wide, trusting eyes. "That money could keep the farm from folding. Could give April a shot at college someday. Carter nodded slowly. Maybe. But I've known you a long time, Ethan. You sell that horse, you'll still lose something you can't buy back. Ethan looked down at his hands, calloused, lined with cracks. I don't even know what that something is anymore. Maybe it's the part of you that still believes in doing right, even when it doesn't make sense. That night, the rain returned. It came quietly at first, then heavier, tapping against the roof like an old memory. River was restless in the barn, pacing, his hooves thudding softly against the floorboards. Ethan sat beside him, listening to the rhythm of the storm. He spoke into the darkness, not sure who he was talking to, himself, the horse, or the ghost of the mare. What do you think I should do, huh? River flicked his ears, breath fogging in the cold air. Then he stepped forward, pressing his muzzle against Ethan's shoulder. It wasn't just a touch. It was insistence, trust, forgiveness, all tangled together. Ethan closed his eyes. You're making this hard, you know that? The foal exhaled softly, a small sound that seemed almost human. It reminded Ethan of the mare's last breath, the way she had rested her head against him, trusting him to understand. He felt the weight of that memory settle deep in his chest. He stayed there until the rain softened. The lantern burned low, casting gold over the walls. At some point, April appeared at the stall door, barefoot, hair tangled from sleep. You're not going to take it, are you? He looked up at her, the decision already forming behind his ribs. No, he said finally. I can't. Her eyes glistened. Promise? I promise. The next morning, he drove into town. The roads were slick, the fields drowned in mist. He parked outside the post office, stepped inside, and handed the envelope to the clerk. Return to sender, he said. Back home, April was waiting on the porch, her breath steaming in the cold. When he climbed out of the truck, she didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around him. River nickered from the paddock, as if joining in. Guess we're staying broke, Ethan said with a laugh that cracked halfway through. April grinned. Broke, but happy. That night, as the stars came out, Ethan walked to the field where the mare had fallen. The clover had started to sprout again, green against the fading snow. He knelt, pressing a hand to the ground. I kept my word, he whispered. A gust of wind moved through the grass, bending it gently, almost like a bow. He turned toward the barn. Through the open door, River stood framed in the lamplight, head lifted high, eyes bright with life. Ethan felt the faint ache of pride, of peace, of something he didn't dare call joy. $15,000 could have bought comfort, but it couldn't buy this. This living, breathing reminder that some promises are worth more than survival itself. The first storm of spring came without warning, rolling in from the south with a roar that made the windows rattle. The clouds hung low and bruised, spilling thunder that seemed to shake the bones of the hills. Ethan had been out in the field since morning, tightening fence lines before the next planting. When the wind began to howl through the holler, he knew this wasn't just another rain. By evening, the valley had turned to gray. Water pooled in the furrows, then poured down toward the creek that cut across his land. The wooden bridge, old as his father's memory, shuddered under the weight of the rising current. Trey ran from the barn, shouting over the storm, "The creek's up to the rails!" Ethan dropped his tools and sprinted through the mud, boots sinking deep. April followed a few yards behind until he barked, "Stay at the house!" She hesitated, but obeyed, clutching her jacket tight. At the edge of the property, the roar of the water drowned everything else. Logs and debris tumbled past in a torrent of brown foam. The bridge was listing, boards snapping under the pressure. Beyond it, on the far bank, something moved, something alive. Ethan wiped rain from his eyes, heart thudding. A horse. At first he thought it was a trick of the storm, the silhouette half swallowed by rain and fog. Then came the sound. A hoarse, broken whinny carried across the water. His chest went tight. The shape limped closer, and the lightning revealed her fully. A mare, soaked and trembling. Her coat the same deep chestnut as the one who'd come to him months ago. For one impossible second, Ethan thought it was Hereth. Her ghost returned through the storm. But then he saw the scars, the burned patch along her shoulder. It couldn't be. River's mother, he breathed. She came back. She stood on the far bank, wild-eyed, the rain cutting streaks through her coat. She called again, a sound full of grief and warning. Behind Ethan, the barn door banged open. River bolted out into the storm, too quick for Trey to stop him. The young horse ran straight toward the creek, hooves splashing mud, nostrils flaring. "River, no!" Ethan shouted. The foal halted at the edge of the bridge, trembling, torn between fear and instinct. The mare whinnied from the other side, answering his cry. The old bridge creaked, boards twisting under the force of the flood. Trey reached Ethan's side. "We have to pull him back." Ethan shook his head, eyes locked on the mare. "If we startle him, he'll panic." He stepped forward, calling softly, "Easy, boy. Stay there." The wind roared, snatching his words away. The bridge swayed. River hesitated, then took a step. "Forward." The mare answered with a low cry that carried across the storm. Ethan's heart hammered. Every instinct screamed at him to grab a rope, to drag the horse back. But something in the mare's eyes, something calm, determined, held him still. She was looking past him, toward the barn, toward safety. "She's trying to cross," Trey said, but his voice faltered. "No," Ethan whispered. "She's trying to bring him home." The next flash of lightning split the sky wide open. The mare lunged forward, hooves striking the first planks of the bridge. The structure groaned. Water surged higher, swallowing the middle rails. Ethan moved without thinking, climbing onto the bridge. River's eyes rolled white with fear, but he didn't bolt. "Come on," Ethan urged, holding out his hand. "Come to me." The young horse took one shaky step, then another. The bridge trembled under the weight of both man and animal. Halfway across, a board split clean through with a crack like gunfire. Trey shouted from the bank, "Ethan, get off it!" The mare cried out, an anguished, desperate sound, and staggered onto the bridge behind them. Her body shielded them from the flying debris as another log slammed against the supports. She pushed forward, her breath coming in gasps. When they reached the near side, Ethan turned back in time to see her stumble. The bridge gave way. The crash was deafening. Wood splintered, water exploded upward in a spray of mud and foam. For a moment, Ethan saw the mare's head above the current, her eyes locked on River's. Then she was gone, swept under by the flood. River screamed, a sound so piercing it seemed to tear the rain in half. He reared, nearly throwing Ethan off balance, then lunged against him, trembling with panic. Ethan threw his arms around the horse's neck, whispering whatever words came to mind. Nonsense, prayers, anything to hold him steady. "It's all right, boy. You're safe. She did it. She got you home." They stood there until the rain softened to a drizzle, until the sound of the flood dulled to a murmur. Trey approached quietly, his face pale. "She saved you both," he said. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Together they led River back toward the barn, mud sucking at their boots. The young horse walked with his head low, every step heavy with something that felt like grief. By the time they reached shelter, dawn was bleeding through the clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and strange. The barn smelled of rain and wood smoke. River stood in the stall, drenched but alive, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhausted. Trey handed him a towel, but he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the valley, where pieces of the broken bridge drifted downstream like fragments of another life. "She came back to finish what she started," Ethan said quietly. "She gave everything she had, twice over." Trey wiped his eyes. "You think she knew what she was doing?" Ethan's voice was rough. "I don't know much about miracles, but that one knew how to love." Outside, the sun broke through the last veil of storm clouds, lighting the wet fields in gold. River turned toward the light, ears pricked, and for the first time, Ethan saw something change in him. The fear had burned away, leaving behind calm, an echo of his mother's courage. Ethan stepped into the stall, rested his hand against the horse's neck, and felt the warmth there, steady, alive, a pulse against his palm. "We'll carry her with us," he said, "every step of the way." River pressed his head against Ethan's shoulder, and the two of them stood there in the golden quiet of the morning, surrounded by the scent of rain and loss and beginnings. The sky had just turned the color of steel when Ethan pulled into the gravel lot outside the county hall. The storm had stripped the valley bare a few days earlier, and the air still carried the scent of mud and broken branches. He sat in the truck for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the small crowd gathering by the courthouse steps, neighbors, reporters, and strangers curious for a story. Trey sat beside him, smoothing the creases in his borrowed shirt. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "We owe her that much." April climbed out from the back seat, clutching a folder of photos, River running through sunlight, May brushing his mane, children from the 4-H group feeding him apples. She had insisted on coming, her small chin lifted with a resolve that made Ethan proud and uneasy all at once. Inside, the hall smelled of dust and varnish, its old clock ticking too loud. Brooke Davenport was already there, sitting near the front with her lawyer. Her hair was pinned perfectly, her dark suit pressed, but something about her looked different, less certain, more human. When their eyes met, she gave a small nod that wasn't quite friendly, but wasn't cold either. The county commissioner, an older man named Judge Holloway, cleared his throat and called the hearing to order. "We're here to address property claims and matters of negligence concerning the recent flood and the loss of livestock belonging to Davenport stables." His gaze shifted to Ethan. "Mr. Cole, you've requested to speak before we proceed with legal review." Ethan rose, hat in hand. His voice, though low, carried through the chamber. "I'm not a man for courts or speeches, but I reckon there's things worth saying that don't fit on paper." He looked at Brooke's lawyer, who straightened his tie impatiently, then at the townsfolk who had come to listen. "That mare, Hiraeth's Laurel, she didn't just wander into my field. She came through fire and storms to save what she could. That foal she left me, that's not a piece of property. That's a life she trusted me with, and I aim to keep that trust." A murmur spread across the room. Brooke's attorney began to stand, but she touched his arm, silencing him. Dr. Carter took the floor next. He presented photos of the burned stables, reports showing faulty wiring and improper stall locks. "There's your negligence," he said bluntly. "If it weren't for this man, that Foal wouldn't be here at all." The commissioner's brow furrowed. "Is there corroboration?" Trey rose from the back row, nervous but determined. "Yes, sir." His voice trembled. "I worked there. The night of the fire, they told us to lock the mares in, said they were spooking the others. When I tried to go back, the doors were jammed. I saw Hirith kick them loose. She saved what she could before she ran." He handed over a small recorder. "That's Mr. Davenport giving the order. I kept it because I knew it wasn't right." The hall fell silent, except for the faint buzz of the old lights. Brooke closed her eyes, her jaw tightening. She didn't look surprised, only tired. When the commissioner asked if she wanted to respond, she stood. Her heels clicked softly on the wooden floor as she faced the room. "What happened that night was my fault," she said. "I was in charge. I thought I was protecting the horses by keeping them contained. I didn't listen to my staff. Because of that, we lost more than animals. We lost something sacred." Her voice caught. "Mr. Cole, you have what's left of her. You've taken better care of that foal than any contract or bloodline could guarantee. I don't want him back." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Ethan looked stunned. Brooke continued, her voice steadier now. "But I'd like to make things right. Davenport Stables will fund safety upgrades for local barns, fire alarms, proper latches. No animal in this county should die the way those did." Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair, eyes softening. "Seems to me the law's been served in its own way." He turned to Ethan. "The foal stays with you, Mr. Cole. Case closed." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the hall. April let out a shaky breath and threw her arms around River's photo, whispering, "We did it." Trey smiled for the first time in months. Brooke approached Ethan as the crowd began to disperse. "You were right," she said quietly. "Horses do choose." He studied her for a moment, then extended his hand. "Maybe people can too." She hesitated, then took it. Her grip was firm, real. "If you ever need feed or vet supplies, call me. No contracts, just help." "Appreciate it," Ethan said. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds split open, revealing a strip of blue sky like a promise. They walked out together, Ethan, April, Trey, and Brooke, past the courthouse steps, where townsfolk offered nods of respect instead of pity. At the truck, April tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Does this mean River's ours for good?" He smiled, eyes glinting with relief. "He's always been ours. We just had to prove it." As they drove home, the valley unfolded before them, green and washed clean. River's silhouette waited at the fence when they pulled in, his ears pricked, eyes bright with welcome. April ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. Ethan stood by the gate, breathing in the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a wait. It felt like a road opening before him, one built not on what he'd lost, but on what he'd kept. That night, as the sun dropped behind the hills, the barn filled with a light as golden as forgiveness. Ethan whispered to River, "She'd be proud of you, boy." The horse flicked his tail, pressed his head against Ethan's chest, and in that wordless moment, everything that had been broken seemed quietly mended. The days after the hearing unfolded like a breath let out too slowly, The valley, once bruised by storms, began to heal in quiet ways, fields greening again, fences repaired, and the air filled with the sweet smell of hay drying under early summer sun. Yet for Ethan, the peace felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with a whisper. Brooke Davenport kept her word. A delivery truck from her stables arrived one morning loaded with hay bales, grain sacks, and medical supplies. The driver, a young woman in a green ranch jacket, handed Ethan a note. For River, no strings attached. B. He tucked the paper into his shirt pocket, unsure whether to call it grace or debt. River had grown into his frame now, taller, steadier, his coat a deep burnished gold that gleamed in the light. The scar on his flank had faded to a faint ripple, more memory than wound. He followed Ethan everywhere, often without a lead, stopping only when the man stopped. April spent hours brushing him, humming the same lullaby May used to sing when the nights were bad. Sometimes she'd braid tiny strands of his mane, tie them with bits of ribbon scavenged from old dresses. "He likes to look nice," she'd say, and Ethan would only smile, pretending not to notice how much comfort she found in those small acts of care. One afternoon, Brooke came to the farm herself. She pulled up in a dust-covered truck this time, not the polished one from before. Her clothes were practical, her hands rougher than he remembered. River's ears perked when he saw her, but he didn't back away. He stood his ground, tail flicking softly in the breeze. Brooke approached slowly, stopping just outside the fence. "He's magnificent," she said. Ethan nodded. "He's hers, through and through." "Maybe," she murmured, eyes following the curve of River's neck. "Or maybe he's yours now. Horses decide who they belong to." There was something in her tone, humility, maybe, or longing, that unsettled him. He realized then that she wasn't just looking at the horse. She was looking for something she'd lost long before the fire. April ran out from the barn, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You came back," she said, all sunshine and innocence. Brooke smiled, crouching to meet her eyes. "I wanted to see how my favorite horse doctor's doing." April giggled. "I'm not a doctor." "You will be," Brooke said. "You've got the hands for it." She held out her own, neatly manicured still but scarred now from rebuilding stalls. "See? Mine learned too late." Ethan watched them, a strange ache blooming in his chest. He realized this woman, once the story's villain, was now just another soul trying to make amends in the only way she knew. Brooke walked toward River, stopping short of touching him. "May I?" Ethan nodded. She reached out slowly until her fingers brushed the horse's mane. River didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered his head, pressing it gently into her palm. Brooke's breath caught, and her shoulders trembled. The barn fell silent, except for the sound of swallows nesting in the rafters. Ethan spoke quietly. "You don't have to carry it anymore." Brooke blinked back tears. "Some things you carry whether you want to or not." "Maybe," he said, "but you can still set them down for a while." They stood there together, two people bound by the same loss, redeemed by the same creature. For the first time, there was no anger between them, no blame, only the shared understanding that life had demanded too much of both. Later, Brooke helped April stack hay in the barn. The girl chatted about her science fair project, something about ecosystems and soil renewal, and Brooke listened, nodding, truly listening. When the sun began to set, she wiped her hands on her jeans and turned to Ethan. "I've been thinking," she said. "That therapy program we lost. I want to start it again. But not at my ranch. Here. With you." With him. Ethan stared, unsure he'd heard her right. Here? River's the kind of horse that heals people just by letting them stand near him. We could make this place a sanctuary. Open a few afternoons a week for veterans, for kids. Nothing big, nothing fancy. Ethan looked around at the worn fences, the chipped paint, the barn that leaned slightly to one side. You think people would come here? Brooke smiled faintly. They won't come for you or for me. They'll come for him. It took a long time for Ethan to answer. Finally, he said, Then we'll need more hands. Brooke's eyes glimmered in the fading light. We'll find them. When she left that evening, the air was warm with the smell of cut grass. River followed her to the gate, stopped, then turned back to Ethan, as if checking to make sure this was all right. Go on, boy, Ethan said. She's part of it too. Brooke paused at her truck, looking back once more. You were right about one thing, she said. Heareth chose well. After she drove away, the farm grew quiet again. Fireflies rose from the fields, tiny lanterns floating through the dusk. April and Trey sat on the porch steps, watching River graze near the fence. May dozed in her rocking chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Ethan leaned against the post, the wood warm under his palm. The valley stretched before him, full of sounds that were once loneliness, but now felt like belonging. The creak of boards, the chirp of crickets, the soft snort of a horse content with the world. He thought of Brooke's trembling hands on River's mane, and how even the smallest act of gentleness could rewrite an entire story. Maybe that was how healing worked. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments, when the broken dared to reach out again. That night, before bed, he stepped into the barn one last time. River stood under the dim light, calm, eyes half closed. Ethan brushed his mane slowly, fingers tracing the same place Brooke had touched. You've done more than I ever could, he whispered. You fixed what people couldn't. River exhaled, lowering his head into Ethan's chest, and the man felt his own heartbeat settle into that same steady rhythm. It was the rhythm of survival, of forgiveness, of something greater than both man and beast. Outside, the crickets sang, the stars came out, and the world, for once, didn't ask for anything more. Summer came quietly to the valley, painting the hills in layers of green and gold. The river, once violent and swollen from storms, now moved gentle and slow, glinting beneath the sun. The air smelled of hay and honeysuckle, of life pushing forward even where the earth had once been broken. The barn stood proud again, fresh paint, new rafters, the scent of cedar still strong in the wood. But it wasn't just a barn anymore. A hand-painted sign hung by the gate, letters carved deep by Trey and colored by April. River and Friends, Healing Stables. The first day they opened, only 3 people came. A war veteran named Hank, with eyes that never seemed to stop searching the distance. A woman who'd lost her husband the year before, and a boy who hadn't spoken since his father's accident. None of them said much at first. They just stood by the paddock fence, watching River graze under the sunlight. Let him come to you, Ethan told them softly. You don't need to ask for anything. He knows. River approached them slow, deliberate, each step like a question. He nudged Hank's sleeve first, then brushed his muzzle against the woman's shoulder. When he stopped in front of the boy, the child's small hand lifted almost on its own. River bent his head until their foreheads touched. The boy made a sound. Not quite a word, but something between a laugh and a breath, And for the first time in months, his mother cried, not from sorrow, but from relief. That was the start. Word spread quietly, the way all good things do. By late summer, there were more faces, more stories. Veterans who'd forgotten how to stand still came to feed the horses. Children too anxious to speak began to giggle when River chased butterflies across the field. Even May, whose memory flickered like a candle, spent long afternoons sitting near the paddock, humming to herself as if the rhythm of the horse's steps kept her anchored to the present. Ethan never called it therapy. He called it company. One afternoon, Brooke returned, driving up the gravel road with a trailer hitched behind her. Inside were 2 rescue horses, one blind, one limping. She stepped out, dust on her jeans, hair pulled back under a cap. "They're not much to look at," she said, "but they've got heart." Ethan grinned. "Then they'll fit right in." They unloaded the horses together, side by side like old friends. When they finished, Brooke lingered by the fence, watching River trot in circles with the newcomers. "You ever think you'd end up here?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not for a second." "Funny," she said. "Sometimes the world doesn't fix what's broken. It just teaches you how to use the cracks." He looked at her, realizing that both of them had changed in ways neither could explain. It wasn't about forgetting the past anymore. It was about learning to carry it differently. As the evening light slanted over the valley, the small group of visitors gathered near the barn. April handed out lemonade. Trey played a slow tune on an old guitar. The sound drifted through the warm air, soft and easy. Ethan walked out into the pasture. River was standing beneath the big oak at the edge of the field, the same one where the mare had once called to him through the storm. He reached up, stroking the horse's neck. "You did this," he said quietly. "All of it." River turned his head, ears twitching, and Ethan swore the horse understood. Maybe not the words, but the weight behind them. The connection that had started in rain and loss had become something larger, something that touched every person who stepped onto this land. April called from the porch, "Uncle Ethan, come see! The sunset looks like it's on fire." He looked up. The sky was ablaze, orange melting into violet, streaks of gold spilling over the hills. It reminded him of the flames that had taken Hearth, and yet there was no fear in it now, only warmth. The same fire that once destroyed now gave light. He walked back toward the barn, April running ahead, her laughter mingling with the evening sounds of crickets and the low murmur of voices. Brooke was helping Hank saddle one of the new rescues. Trey was teaching the boy how to brush a horse's mane. And in the middle of it all stood River, calm, radiant, unshaken, the living thread that bound them together. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan glanced toward the far field where wildflowers grew thick. That was where Hearth rested, beneath the oak roots and the soil she had crossed mountains to find. He took off his hat, holding it against his chest. "You can rest easy, girl," he whispered. "You didn't just save him. You saved all of us." The wind rose, soft and warm, carrying the scent of clover across the yard. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard a faint whinny echo from the hills, a sound not of sorrow, but of homecoming. When darkness settled, the porch lights flicked on. Fireflies floated over the paddock, little embers of life dancing in the night. May began humming again, a tune older than any of them, and the others joined quietly until the air felt full of something holy. Ethan leaned against the fence beside River. Funny, isn't it? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. We spend half our lives waiting for miracles, and they show up looking like work, mud, sweat, and one stubborn horse. River snorted softly, as if agreeing. They stood together under the velvet sky, man and horse breathing in rhythm, the world still turning gently around them. Somewhere in that quiet, Ethan realized the miracle had already happened. It wasn't in the money he'd refused or the justice won in court. It was here, in laughter returning to a home that had forgotten its sound, in the touch of a frightened child learning to trust again, in the steady heartbeat against his palm. It was in knowing that love, once given freely, never really dies. It only changes form, passing from hand to hand, from heart to heart, until even the most broken among them learn how to live again. And as the stars spread across the sky like scattered embers, Ethan whispered one last time, "Thank you, Hearth." River lifted his head, ears flicking toward the night, and for a moment the valley seemed to breathe with them, alive, whole, and full of light. And now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Ethan's place that night, facing the storm, the dying mare, and the tiny foal, what would you have done? Would you have kept River and protected him no matter what? Comment 0 if you would, or 1 if you think you couldn't. Your answer might be different, but every heart feels something when a soul chooses love over fear. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more true, emotional stories between humans and the horses that change their lives forever.